Hey everybody, I'm Brandy Kelly and I'm a superintendent on a mission to lead with hope. The Lead with Hope podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that will inspire and empower you to lead with hope. Today, I'm honored to interview Jessica Cabeen. Jessica is the principal of Alternative Educational Programs and Austin Online Academy in Austin, Minnesota. She is an NAESP Middle Level Fellow and a Future Ready Principal. Jessica is the author of Hacking Early Learning, Balance Like a Pirate, Unconventional Leadership, Lead with Grace, leaning into the soft skills of leadership, and Principle and Balance. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brandy, for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad that you came on today. And today I'm going to open the show up by inviting you to share your story. Tell us why you became an educator and a little bit more about who you are.
Sure thing. So I definitely took a non-traditional route. I actually went in to college as a music therapist. So my initial degree was outside of education. I worked with juveniles and adults with disabilities for a few years, and then really felt like my calling was back in the school setting. So I was a music therapist in the public schools up in St. Paul, Minnesota for a number of years. And at that point, really felt called to go into the teaching profession. And back in that day, back in the denim jumper day. So if you know what a denim jumper is and you've seen it around, you know, that's how old I am. There was a program where if you were committed to pursuing your teaching license and working in special education, the St. Paul schools would pay for your degree. So I received a master's in teaching. And then I turned around and was an autism teacher for about 4 years in St. Paul, and then moved into like a assistant director of special ed position, and then kind of moved into this leadership realm where I think I just did the math. I've been in some form of leadership for the last 17 years. So that's been really neat to be able to scale a little bit. So if you know, obviously your audience is pretty wide range, but if you're a teacher and you're always like, oh, I don't know, but you have that inkling, it's amazing to start to make that impact in your classroom and just see it continue to widen that net as your positions change. So I'm fortunate to say that I have hit all ages. So I was a middle school assistant principal. Then I was a kindergarten principal for 6 years. So 405-year-olds for 6 years. Then I went back to the middle school, and now I'm at the high school. So my first class of kindergartners are now going to be seniors here at our high school. So it's really neat to be able to see them all the way through. I had them in middle school, and now I have them in high school. So that's kind of neat. You kind of always remember the ones that need to be remembered. Yeah. And so my husband thinks it's hilarious. I can remember what critter or teacher, you know, at least half of the kids had. So that's been really neat. And I really just feel like my current passion in positional work is just continuing to help educators find work-life balance. I just think the job continues to get more challenging. And as the Duke basketball coach says, we just need to learn to handle hard better. And I think that's just a really great mantra for us to consider as we continue to be educators in extremely challenging times.
Absolutely. So you have been, you said, a leader K-12. So I've got to ask you this question. I too have been a leader pre-K-12. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
All right.
Yeah.
Middle school.
Middle school. Same. Middle school. And
middle school.
I was a school social worker. So special ed was where I started out. And that sounds like that's where you started out as well. You were an autism teacher. Tell me why an autism teacher? I mean, you could probably do anything in special ed, right?
Absolutely. And I think, so I have to attribute that to my mom. So my mom was a speech pathologist for her entire career up in northern Wisconsin, and she had the pre-K 21 experience. And so I was going, you know, I was in elementary middle school in the 80s, and we had a young man who was on the autism spectrum prior to really autism being fully understood. And so I ended up getting to babysit him growing up. And it was just because of my mom's connection with the family. And I really enjoyed that. And then when I got to college, I was able to work in institutions while they were still established. And so that was a unique position. And I really do think like my mom just had a gift of working with people on the spectrum before people really knew how to work with them. And so I really aspired to grow up to be like her.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Sound like you have a wonderful mother and a wonderful role model in her. So that is awesome. And I like what you said about the Duke coach, handle hard better, because in this landscape of education, it is such a privilege to be an educator and a leader, but it's also a very heavy responsibility. What makes it so hard? Why do you think, where have we gone to where in this day and age, we have a crisis in leadership. People are not staying in educational leadership. We have teachers who are leaving the field in large numbers. How did we get to this point?
I mean, there's a lot of different influences and factors that are out of our control. And I think one of the things that we can, or at least I've really leaned into, is just being vulnerable and admitting when we don't know. And I think too often, and I was guilty of that when I started, is I got the title, I got the business card, I had the fancy suits and shoes back in the day. And I thought I needed to know all the answers and be on all the time. And what I've learned in my years of leadership is really bringing other people in. And when I think about strategic planning, it's a listen, learn, and lead. I think too often we jump into just leading and just going instead of sitting back and listening to stakeholders, learning, digging into research and other practices and connecting with other people, and then taking that leadership step. And I feel like in all of my years of leadership and talking with people who have worked with me as teachers, they've said that they're like, Jess, you're really great at being vulnerable and reframing and just having a positive attitude. No matter what's going on, we can always find glimmers of hope to move forward with. And I think as educators, sometimes we can get stuck in the yuck and not get out of that pit. And so really being able to start to see those glimmers of hope and trying to move forward and reframing things have been really essential, not only for my work life, but my home life too. Just being able to reframe and to continue to refocus on what's going well instead of always thinking about what's not, really helps us to at least helps me to get through the days. And sometimes the days are better than others, but I think it's always important to see the positive sides of things. And that really helps us to build those positive cultures. And in our online school, we're seeing remarkable results from this positive interactions and reframing situations.
Yeah. Sometimes, whenever we're going through this, we have to find those resources, things that we can do to help us to embrace the yuck, embrace the suck, whatever it is, however we're going to say it, and just forge through it, because we have to keep moving forward in order to get to the other side, right? And so, that sometimes that reframing, those tools that you talked about, that is how we lead with hope. And as you probably know, lead with hope for me is a system of self-efficacy. And I believe in education today, we need hope more than ever. And H stands for habits, O for optimistic outlook, P for passion, purpose, and perseverance, and E stands for excellence. So of those letters, which one resonates most with you and why?
They're all amazing. So it's hard to choose one, but I'm going to sit with E stands for excellence. And I think in the last 2 years working as a high school online principal or just a high school administrator, really holding that bar high for kids has been really important. I think so often our kids, because I've known these kids since kindergarten, and they were like, I'm going to be, a doctor. I'm going to be you when I grow up. And then they get to high school and they're like, Cabeen, I am like 2 years behind, or Cabeen, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so just always, I have the gift of knowing so many of these students since they were little and always seeing the best in them, expecting the best of them and of myself. And we just sit and I just say, okay, now let's get this next class done, or let's get this next class done. And then it's helped me to really start to see some of those barriers, especially in higher ed and navigating FAFSA and college entrance and all those pieces. And so in reflection, I've talked to a couple students that now, like, they're almost 30. And I'm like, what was it about me? And they'll say, you never gave up on me. You drove me crazy in middle school. You followed me around the halls and you made sure I got to class on time, but you always expected that excellence of me. And you always, some of my students who have had the most challenging life circumstances and adversity outside of school have said, you never quit on me. You always expect that best of me and of who I am. And even if I screwed up, you always said, okay, the next day, let's try again. And I think as an educator, having that foundational understanding of excellence and where we want all of our kids to be helps so we don't ever lower the bar or diminish the abilities and capabilities of all of our kids.
Yeah, that is so perfectly stated. And it makes me think of a quote by Stephen Covey. He talks about how we inspire greatness in others. And of course, I'm not going to think of the quote right now when I need it, but you've got to see that greatness in them, and you've got to hold that for them until they can see it in themselves sometimes. And it takes a special person to do that, but educators have that gift. Now, the next question focuses on adversity in our life. Lead with Hope for me was kind of born out of tragedy and trauma. And I believe that tragedy, trauma, adversity, that can help us with the proper reframing to get better. I feel like those difficult times are the bumps that we climb on. So is there any adversity that you would be comfortable sharing today that has helped you to become the educator, the person that you are today?
Yes. And I share about this story a little bit in the Principle and Balance book that I've written, just kind of the call to action for me. So we're coming up on the anniversary in August, and I can still remember the chair I was sitting in our back to school administrative meeting. And I was waiting on the phone call because we were in the process of adopting our son from Africa. And so we had met him 6 months prior. I had done all the things. I checked all the boxes. The room was ready. We had met already once, and we were just waiting for the call to go back. And so I'm sitting in this chair and the phone rings. Back in the day, the flip phone, and I'm like, oh, here's the call. And so I run out, take the call, getting ready. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be out of school now, back to school. And instead of it being the call that it was time to pick him up, it was the call that said the adoption had been terminated. And so we were adopting internationally, and there was some contention going on in the country. And our social worker just said, it's over. And so we went from 2 weeks to the school year starting to this, like, this is going to happen, to absolute devastation. And in reflection, I started to see a therapist. And so he really identified it as ambiguous loss. And so comparable to a miscarriage, where it's really hard for others to really understand when you lose a child in that way, because there's no physical evidence that people it was really hard for people to really understand and have conversations around me. So people just started to get really silent. And so I ended up kind of retreating myself. I'll tell you, like, the hours that afterwards, my husband met me, we went home, our pastor came to us, and then we had to go to the elementary school my son was at to tell him that his brother wasn't coming home. And then I went to work. Like, I literally went to work that night. I was like, the only thing I can do right now is my job. And I was an assistant principal at the time. And the first month was extremely hard, like, to try to just get up every day and try to forge forward. And everybody else kind of felt like it was normal. And to me, it was like my life had changed completely. And it took a lot out of me. And really, to be very frank, I sunk into a really deep depression. And it was only by the grace of my dear friend Ron that I'm here today. Staged a wonderful intervention, had the counselor at the middle school meet with me and say, okay, I vetted these therapists, and none of them have kids in our school. So you'll never have the conflict of interest of disciplining their child as you see them for therapy. And so I went through some really intensive therapy and found some strategies and coping to help kind of come out of that darkness. And in a very Hallmark lifetime kind of movie, by Christmas, we had government officials here in the United States work with the government in Africa and overturn the courts, and we were able to bring him home. So it went from like absolute tragedy to triumph to now I have a 5-year-old who's had some extremely traumatic events in his life. And so I really do feel for anybody in your audience that has adopted or foster care. because it's one thing to work with students with trauma or reactive attachment in your schools. It's another thing to build up the resiliency as an adult to pull into the garage and turn it on as a parent at home. And so that's really where, for me, finding that balance and finding those coping skills so I can lead at work and live a life, so I can be my best self for my boys at home, and serve my community as well.
So you adopted your son after, I'm glad you had a positive ending to that, but was that time frame, was it, you said when you were assistant principal? Okay.
Mhm.
And so where does your books fall into that? Did you write your first book before or after you adopted your son?
After my first book came after, and I ironically, we started to see a therapist, a really, like, we still see this therapist. It's almost been, oh my gosh, 15 years. We still see this therapist, but I finished that school year as the assistant principal, and then I became the kindergarten principal. So I was my son's principal. And
Oh,
so I'm like, we're gonna bond. Here
yeah,
we go. I will eat lunch with you every day.
you
But
couldn't get
it
away.
helped me recenter and reprioritize my work life and my home life, because I think prior to that, I was really kind of coasting at home, and bringing him home really helped me recenter that, like, no, my priorities need to be at home, because he needs to really learn that I'm going to be here for him all the time. And that means I can't be at work till 8, 9 at night every night. So, yeah. And actually, I think after the adoption and after I really recalibrated is when I got into this ability to write, and I'm on my 5th book now. So,
Oh, that's amazing. And, for me, I'm just starting up my first book. It is a therapy in and of itself, just writing. It's cathartic. It's that process of self-reflection and building your level of self-awareness. And, yeah, I don't know. I've read some of your books and you are an amazing writer. And I encourage all of my listeners to pick up the books that we mentioned at the intro of the show, because you truly are an amazing writer. And I appreciate what you said in terms of that, dealing with that trauma that your kids have. I mean, dealing with it as an educator is one thing, but then coming home and starting that second shift, it's truly a labor of love. But I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing for you, but your son just could not get away from you when you became the kindergarten principal.
I know we're having some conversations about the fact that he's a senior this year, and he's like, mother, he always calls me mother. You can't come to college with me. Like, this is the end. Cause I was his middle school principal too. And now I've been at the high school with him for 3 years. He's like,
Awesome.
mother, we're gonna cut the cord. But I'd also just because it just came to me too. I think as educators, we always put ourselves last.
Mhm.
Always. And so we look at everyone else saying, oh, I wish I had time to write a book, or I wish I had time to run a race, or I wish I had time to go back to school. And I'm just here to tell you, please prioritize yourself. We're self-care isn't selfish, and at times it can be really life-saving. And finding ways to fill yourself up every single day builds that muscle, so then you can, again, lead at work and live a life. So really prioritize on your calendar something that you've always wanted to do and never had the time to get it done, whether it's journaling, writing, blogging, cooking, or spending time with your family. It's just like scheduling it and putting yourself first is something as educators we never do. And if someone here is, nervous about that, just be like, oh, that principal in Minnesota said I'm supposed to prioritize myself. And the more you do it and you build that muscle, you're going to find you feel better about yourself and what you do at home and at work. And you're able to, like, things just still get done, but you actually feel better about it because you're taking care of yourself at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very powerful message. You talked about the counseling that you've received. Sometimes people are apprehensive to do that, but I think counseling or coaching, whatever works for you, it is such a powerful tool for us in being able to identify those resources, those coping skills, whatever it is that you need to, like you said, take care of yourself. And that is so incredibly important. Now, the thing that I want to do is skydiving, but I don't think that qualifies as self-care. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's a leisure hobby goal. It's a goal. Achieving goals builds that muscle of confidence for the next one.
That's awesome. I love that. So you talked earlier in the podcast about a passion project of, focusing on that work-life balance. So can you tell us more about a project that you are undertaking right now to pursue that goal?
Yes. It is also indicative of this very empty office. So before we came on, I let Brandy know I've added another position to my current position. So starting actually July 1 today, I'm now the principal of our alternative learning center. And so not only do I get to continue to see the success of our online high school, but now I'll get to work with students that I'm really passionate about. That being said, I have just added a whole nother school to the schools that I'm already serving. So I'm going to be taking next week off to really reset and really think about how do I set my ideal week up, because I can't add another day to the work week. And I really want to make sure my son's senior year, he sees his mom at his events and sees her at home, and I'm able to do that. So this is my passion project this year, is I've really spent the last couple of years regaining some balance and seeing some great health goals achieved, weight goals, strength goals. And I don't want to lose all of that with the new stress of this position. And we know stress can be good and stress can be bad. And so what I'm going to try to navigate in the next, 6 months to a year is how do I add this position and still show up as my best self in all my environments?
Yeah. And you also do keynote speaking in addition to being a principal and a writer. So in terms of your books, your speaking, all of the things that you're doing, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, how can they go about doing that?
The socials is a great place to start. So you can find me on Instagram and the formerly known as Twitter and Facebook as Principal in Balance or Jessica Cabeen. I will be at the principal conference coming up here in July, and then occasionally I'll go out and do some speaking during the school year, but it's been more just I do some coaching and just some conversations with leaders, and occasionally I'll get to a state conference or work with districts too, which is really fun. I was just out in Utah last month and spent the day with about 1,000 teachers, and it was incredible, that energy and just the excitement, and it's always fun when I get to go and talk about educator well-being, because that's just what I love to do. And so when districts and states are like, yep, we want to focus on this, it's really neat to be able to serve people in that capacity.
Yeah, and it is so needed as we lead with hope. And so I want to encourage everyone to check out Jessica's blogs and connect with her on the socials, pick up her book, and I look forward to following you and seeing what you write next, Jessica.
Thanks, Brenda. I'm looking forward to your work as well.
Thank you. And thanks for coming on the show. If you're listening today, don't forget to subscribe, and have a great day, everyone.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.